Well, in preparation for the opening of the Hobbit movie, December the 14th, we decided to propose this talk. And I'd just like to first start off by allowing Tolkien himself to say how the Hobbit began.
The actual beginning, though it's not really the beginning, but the actual flashpoint was, I remember very clearly. I can still see the corner in my house in 20 North Road where it happened. I got an enormous pile of exam papers there, and marking school examinations in the summertime is an enormous, very laborious, and unfortunately also boring. I remember picking up the paper, and actually if I nearly gave an extra mark for it, extra 5 marks, actually, with one page of this particular paper was left blank. Glorious. Nothing to read, so I scribbled on it, I can't think why, in a hole in the ground, the level of hobbit. I think that was eventually published in 1937.
So you see what kinds of things university professors get up to when they only have a blank sheet in front of them. But Tolkien quite consciously says this is not really the beginning, he says, and just a kind of parenthetical remark in there. He says it's not really the beginning because the whole of this kind of imaginative universe begins at just before the First World War with his invention of a fictional language. As a philologist, a lover of language, he composed his own language and then from that moment started to think about what kind of people would actually speak this language. And it's from that he started compiling a series of tales about the kind of fictional circumstances, the kinds of epic peoples who would live in this Middle Earth, the place he came up with as the locale of this language and of these people. And so he started building a series of stories which later were compiled into what we now know as the Silmarillion. He begins really drawing on his own experience as a university professor and the kinds of literature that he studied. So, for example, the Kalevala, the Finnish folk tales, tales about epic heroes, or Beowulf, which tells the story of, at least in its second half, of a thief who goes and takes something from a dragon's hoard. Sound familiar? He used Norse and Icelandic sagas, and he drew a lot on the Germanic and Scandinavian literature that he knew so well from his own studies of language. He began The Hobbit, just as you heard, as a kind of fanciful beginning, just a sentence written down on a page, but it was only later that as he wrote, suddenly bits and pieces from his whole imaginary universe, this Middle Earth, started creeping and making their way into his own story. And suddenly The Hobbit started taking place in Middle Earth. And the characters suddenly started being the same sorts of characters he had already been writing about. He finished and published The Hobbit in 1937, after he submitted the draft to George Allen and Unwin publishers. Mr. Unwin submitted the draft to his very best reviewer, who was Rainer Unwin, his 8-year-old son, who reviewed the book and gave it, thankfully, a huge thumbs up. And the book went on to publication. Lord of the Rings began immediately after. It was actually requested by George Allen and Unwin as a kind of sequel to The Hobbit. And Tolkien enthusiastically took on this project. As a matter of fact, if we were to watch a little bit more of that video, we'd actually hear him say that he wanted to do a rather long narrative. And he wanted to do it in the same sort of scope as The Hobbit, in the sense that he wanted it to be a lengthy search for a lengthy travelogue with some sort of an object at the end of it. He began in 1938, but didn't finish it until 1954. He took 16 years to finish The Lord of the Rings. He was notorious about detail, and so he was constantly reworking details and constantly putting his own writing under a microscope in order to produce The Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit is very much a children's tale, you might say. He composed it originally for his children, and his children were his first critics as he read the story to them. It's important, I think, to see this not merely as a children's story, just as we're not meant to see The Lord of the Rings as merely a kind of fantasy novel. Tolkien wrote as a Catholic Christian, and he put his own Catholicism within what he had to write. In a letter to Father Robert Murray, a Jesuit priest and the grandson of Sir James Murray, who was the founder of the Oxford English Dictionary, Tolkien wrote the following. The Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious, I think we can also apply this to The Hobbit. The Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, unconsciously so at first, but consciously in the revision. That is why I have not put in or have cut out practically all references to anything like religion, to cults or practices in the imaginary world. For the religious element is absorbed into the story and the symbolism. However, that is very clumsily put and sounds more self-important than I feel. For as a matter of fact, I have consciously planned very little, and should chiefly be grateful for having been brought up, since I was 8, in a faith that has nourished me and taught me all the little that I know, that I owe to my mother, who clung to her conversion and died young, largely through the hardships of poverty resulting from it. The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings are Christian and products of the Christian imagination, not so much because they are allegories, but precisely because they are stories. They are stories that stand in themselves, and it's in seeing the story and what goes on in the story that we are able to draw forth from it meaning. Insofar as the story is analogous to the life we lead here, we can draw out the Christian meaning of it. Tolkien always rejected the whole realm of allegory, and he had a great appreciation for story as story. He thought of allegory as a kind of simplistic disguise, something which reduced the story to a cheap wrapper which delivered the candy, an instrument or a code necessary for the transmission of the capital R, real capital P point, or the deeper meaning. Christian or Catholic commentators often allegorize The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, saying that, for example, Galadriel or Elbereth is the Virgin Mary, or that Gandalf is Jesus, like Aslan in C.S. Lewis's Narnia series, or implying that Frodo is the Christian, along the lines of John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress or the medieval play Everyman. When asked in his last radio interview in 1971 whether The Lord of the Rings was an allegory, Tolkien replied immediately, "No, I dislike allegory wherever I smell it." His statement here agrees entirely with the longer statement given in a letter to his publisher concerning the same point. I don't think I have enough time really to go through that. We can see both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings really as products of the Christian imagination, as Tolkien spoke about in his famous essay on fairy stories. He's talking here about those kind of children's tales, fanciful tales. And he coins a new literary term to express one of the essential marks of fairy stories, the turn of the story at the last moment from utter failure and despair to triumph. We might think of the Battle of Five Armies in The Hobbit, for example, as this moment. This movement, which he claimed was the aim of fairy stories to produce, he called the eucatastrophe, the sudden turn from despair to joy, as he tried to express in a letter to his son Christopher during the Second World War. And I quote, "All of a sudden, I realized what it was, the very thing that I've been trying to write about and explain in that fairy story essay. For it, I coined the word eucatastrophe, the sudden happy turn in a story which pierces you with a joy that brings tears, which I argued it is the highest function of fairy stories to produce. And I was there led to the view that it produces its peculiar effect because it is a sudden glimpse of truth. Your whole nature, chained in material cause and effect, the chain of death, feels a sudden relief as if a major limb out of joint had suddenly snapped back. It perceives, if the story has any literary truth on the second plane, for which see the essay, that this is indeed how things really do work in the great world for which our nature is made. And I concluded by saying that the resurrection was the greatest eucatastrophe possible in the greatest fairy story, and produces that essential emotion, Christian joy, which produces tears because it is qualitatively so like sorrow, because it comes from those places where joy and sorrow are at one, reconciled, as selfishness and altruism are lost in love. Of course, I do not mean that the Gospels tell what is only a fairy story, but I do mean very strongly that they do tell a fairy story, the greatest. Man, the storyteller, would have to be redeemed in a manner consonant with his nature by a moving story. But since the author of it is the supreme artist and author of reality, this one was also made to be true on the primary plane, so that in the primary miracle, the resurrection, and the lesser Christian miracles too, though less, you have not only that sudden glimpse of truth behind the apparent necessity or constraint of our world, but a glimpse that is actually a ray of light through the very chinks of the universe about us. So, for Tolkien, the Catholic novel did not require obvious references to piety or religion, but rather a consistent, enjoyable narrative which would move one to a consideration of the truth. And so moving one to truth, moving one also to tears, tears both of sorrow and joy. The evident Catholic and Christian symbols and imagery, the avocations of grace and providence, and the Christian moral universe expressed in the main plot all form part of a story which imparts Christian truth, though not through, however, homiletic allegory, but through creative imagination.
These were wonderful remarks from Father Trudel, very illuminating. Let me just say that I think that it's very appropriate that you're all sitting comfortably fed. Perhaps we could declare this a hobbit day. You know, you're all comfortable, you're well fed, and perhaps we could just take a nap this afternoon in honor of the hobbits. Okay. What I'd like to do, following on Father's very fine remarks, is discuss a little bit about the concept of heroism, specifically in The Hobbit, though by extension to The Lord of the Rings as well. And let me begin with the basic concept of literary heroism. I mean, what is a literary hero? Tolkien, as Father has reminded you, and as I will remind you, was a literary critic. That was his job. And he was highly influenced by reading epic tales of heroic struggle. So the hero in all the great epics is a figure that faces a challenge. He goes out of the world he's in. He faces a grave challenge. Usually there are archetypal parts of this. A monster. He goes to a foreign land. He or she will face an opponent, be tempted by, or be tested by this opponent, and in some regard come back, but not as he was. So this is the concept of epic heroism. And you could all think of the great epic heroes. Achilles, he was a mighty warrior. Aeneas, also a mighty warrior. Agamemnon, also a mighty warrior. Beowulf, also a mighty warrior. You see that there's Even in Paradise Lost, when Milton wrote Paradise Lost, Satan becomes the hero, but he too considers himself a mighty warrior. So there's this concept in epic heroism that a figure representative of his culture's way of life, some great warrior, goes forth, does battle, and comes back. Now, I would like to suggest that something like this is happening in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, but the trajectory of epic heroism is profoundly, profoundly changed. Father referenced the real influence of Christianity and Catholicism upon the concept of epic heroism, and that's what I would like to discuss today. And we see the beginning of this in The Hobbit. The Hobbit is, in a sense, the beginning of a very long epic journey, a very long epic struggle, involving multiple people. So in that regards, it's like the Aeneid, or the Iliad, or the Odyssey, where you've got groups of people from a culture involved in a big struggle that will transform all of them in some regard. Now, this is just good fun. I'd like to begin my discussion of the concept of heroism in The Hobbit by looking at a few passages from the beginning. Okay. And this, I cannot read the beginning of The Hobbit without finding it extraordinarily funny. One of my daughters was reading it to me, she's young, and she giggles when she reads it too, because Bilbo does not want to see Gandalf. He's irritated by him, he's aggravated by him, and we'll see why in just a moment. Now, who are hobbits and what are they like? First of all, I'm going to begin this idea that they're unlikely heroes. They're nothing in the world like Achilles. They're nothing in the world like Agamemnon or Aeneas or Beowulf. They're nothing like these people. This is how The Hobbit begins. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. We see they're comfort-loving folk. You love the hobbits. We all love the hobbits. They're like us in that regard. Now, I'm going to read another passage. This is a story. Now, here comes the disruptive part. This is a story of how a Baggins had an adventure and found himself doing and saying things altogether unexpected. So what we're going to see in a moment is that hobbits don't like adventures. They do not want to be drawn out of their world of comfort, the world we all like to have around us. Another passage from this very beginning. By some curious chance, one morning long ago, in the quiet of the world, when there was less noise and more green, and the hobbits were still numerous and prosperous, and Bilbo Baggins was standing at his door after breakfast, smoking an enormous long wooden pipe that reached nearly down to his woolly toes, neatly brushed, Gandalf came by. Gandalf, if you had heard only a quarter of what I have heard about him, and I've only heard very little of all there is to hear, you would be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. The image we have is that a person in his comfortable life, in this very comfortable existence, is being disrupted by a call to adventure. This is the beginning of all epic heroism. It's the call to adventure. Someone comes and summons you to an adventure. And maybe one more passage, and then I'll make a few other remarks. Yes. Gandalf, they have a conversation where Bilbo's essentially trying to get rid of him, but Gandalf persists. Gandalf says, I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning. I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure that I'm arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone. And then Bilbo responds, I should think so in these parts. We are plain, quiet folk, and have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner. I can't think what anybody sees in them, said Mr. Baggins, and stuck one thumb behind his braces and blew out another even bigger smoke ring. So, here we are. This is the great template of heroism. The hero is called outside of himself. And usually you don't want to do this because it's painful and difficult and potentially life-threatening. So Gandalf brings him on an adventure. And then let me go to the very end. Now, here at the end of The Hobbit, you'll see that Gandalf, and this is much to do with Christianity, the concept of, you have a hero who is weak, who is lowly, who is unlikely, who is not a warrior. So I just put this idea in your head here. Now, this is a very different template of heroism, and it extends into The Lord of the Rings. Another interesting fact about the concept of heroism in The Hobbit and in The Lord of the Rings is that the hero, because he's so unlikely, because he's so uncharacteristic and frankly very weak, is dependent upon several things. One, he's dependent upon a community of people around him to help him succeed. He cannot succeed without these people around him. And secondly, central to the concept in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings is that they need magic and strength to succeed. And there's this idea here that I like to think, not to allegorize, but I like to think that there is this notion, it's sort of akin to the divine presence and grace. It's not possible to live the Christian life without supernatural intervention, and it's not possible to live the Christian life without a community in which to do it. So you see, this is the only way that a hobbit could possibly be an epic hero is if he has access to these two things. Okay, let me mention another thing that I find interesting about the world of the Hobbit. The Hobbit's world is much, much darker than it appears, and here I'm referencing the Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit is the beginning of the end of an epic, of an era. The ring means that he's living in a world that is on the verge of almost complete annihilation, almost complete collapse and destruction. The victory of evil is about, only a few years away when Bilbo discovers this ring. This ring is the beginning of the end. So there's a type of apocalyptic character here, that the world as we know it is about to fall apart, and in a way that seems completely unstoppable, which is part of what's so troubling about the heroes being Bilbo and Frodo, the people you think least likely to stop someone like Sauron or to resist the power of the ring. So we are living in the universe is a type of an apocalyptic one, where the end of all that is good, the victory of evil, seems imminent, and it seems almost impossible for it to stop. Okay. And maybe my final remark will be about the nature of the going forth and coming back, both for Bilbo, in our current discussion, and also for Frodo. That's the great heroic template I was talking about. That through the assistance of other people around him, Bilbo prevails, and so does Frodo after his own fashion. But I think there's something interesting here and different and inherently Christian about the concept of this heroism. Is that Bilbo, notice this, both Bilbo and Frodo, after they have their adventures, are incapable of coming back to what I would call, or what other scholars have called, normal hobbitic life. When they come back, they're not really able to be what they used to be. They still want to be comfortable, but they're very restless with their world of comfort. Bilbo comes back, and he's restless, and he passes that on to Frodo. And Frodo comes back; he's almost completely incapable of enjoying the life of being a hobbit, and he departs for the Grey Havens. So there's something about this here, that the hero experiences a type of change which can only be akin to conversion. It's Augustinian. Perhaps when you embrace the gospel, you become dissatisfied with the world you used to know, the world that seemed a place of comfort. They're all natural goods, but they're now dissatisfying. They're not satisfactory. And there's also this notion that in one's brush with evil, it's not so much dealing with militarily conquering it as it is with being scarred by it. Bilbo suffers because he comes into contact with the ring. It scars him permanently. Frodo carries this on. He comes into direct contact with evil, and it burns him very deeply. He's transformed by good, but not in the sense of some euphoric Hallmark moment where he comes in. No, he's transformed by good because he suffers for it. Bilbo suffers for it, and Frodo suffers for it. And so this transformation, they see evil face to face, and they suffer for the sake of good. This makes them incapable of coming back to their normal lives and embracing it in the way they used to. Okay. And I think that, so these are maybe near the end of my remarks about the nature of heroism here. But I would like to end echoing some other scholars who have seen this. There's this link, I think, between, if I could associate the worldview of Middle-earth with a particular person, it would probably be with my main man, St. Augustine. That, you're in this world and you're going to be stung by life. It will hurt you. You will suffer for what is good. That is inescapable. The chances of you completely succeeding, of the good completely succeeding, not so good. But nonetheless, that is what one must do. One must suffer for the sake of good and hope that ultimately it will prevail. And as Father pointed out, it tends to prevail in the unlikeliest of ways, in this fairy way. I think that's why fairy tales have such an appeal to us. So St. Augustine, as I often like to say in one of his great works, he says there's the city of God and the city of man. The hobbits and all of us are in the city of man. It will never be a perfect place. It will be a place where good and evil are always in contrast with each other. But ultimately, we will find our home outside of this if we go on our own heroic journeys, whatever they look like. Okay, so there is, I think, a deep Augustinianism in Tolkien's thought after a fashion. And I would like to conclude my remarks on the concept of heroism in The Hobbit with just a brief quote from one of Tolkien's letters. This is just a biographical fact I point out to you. That Tolkien did, I think, about 1 year of active service in the First World War, where he called it a searing experience for him, that he witnessed an enormous amount of carnage. And, he said, something like this, I'm paraphrasing one of his letters, he said, describing my experiences there is very much what he's talking about Mordor as this burnt, horrible, burnt-out, desolate place. And so he had a very direct experience of the power of evil in his own early military service, and that really scarred him in many ways. Didn't make him despair, but I think very much scarred him. So I would like to conclude with a little quote from Tolkien. This is from a very nice book written by Bradley Berzer called The Sanctifying Myth. It's a very nice study of the Christian imagination of Tolkien. And here Berzer writes, in 1971, just 2 years before his death, Tolkien praised the role of human will in survival. And here's a nice quote from Tolkien. Tolkien says, I've always been impressed that we're here surviving because of the indomitable courage of quite small people against impossible